Honourable Member for Laborie.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, generally we would come to this House and just a routine thing of borrowing to meet our fiscal deficit. But there is a time and place to borrow to finance a fiscal deficit, Mr. Speaker. To probably borrow to invest in productive activities with some future returns. But everything is sensitive to context today, Mr. Speaker, because we are not in a normal setting where a government is operating normally. The member for Kasri Southeast has criticized the opposition in his response to supporting his government's motion. You do not need to be a seminal figure in economics or finance to know, Mr. Speaker, that the member for Kasri Southeast is completely lost when it comes to responding to issues dealing with the opposition and its management of the economy of this country. Mr. Speaker, what did he criticize? He criticized the Labour Party for pursuing some general principles that have allowed smaller economies to engage successfully with globalization and maintain fiscal sanity. Pursue in the context of a fiscal deficit we inherited when we entered office in 2011, we pursued a calibrated policy response that addressed the real policy challenges in a way that preserved fiscal stability. Consequently, we treated St. Lucia with a combination of fiscal consolidation, active debt management, a lowering of domestic vulnerabilities to external shocks, and the implementation of a growth-enhancing reform strategy. This is the way responsible governments and competent politicians go about the business of administering the necessary medication to return our country to fiscal sanity. In comes the United Workers' Party administration in 2016, Mr. Speaker, promising the people of this country all sorts of things. All sorts of things. Jobs, lowering the tax burden on the people of St. Lucia. They promise all sorts of things, Mr. Speaker. That they're only going to borrow to have a balanced budget very quickly. They are not going to have any fiscal deficits. But what did they do, Mr. Speaker? They even had an orange march accusing the government at the time of having a hidden $6.80. Yes, which the Prime Minister promised in this sitting of the House to actually show us where that $6.80 was hidden. They had an orange march, Mr. Speaker. When they got into office, they put another $1.50 on the $6.80 that they claimed that we had hidden in the fuel taxes. So essentially, Mr. Speaker, they promised to reduce license fees by 50%, which they did not. 100%. Half. They said they want to slash it down. Half of the increase. Half. No, you didn't say half of the increase. You said half. By 50%. It was not anything to do with increase. But you know what? Came in, decided to do some surgery on VAT because they said they're going to lower VAT and eventually eliminate the VAT and then slash the license fees by 50%. What did they do, Mr. Speaker? If there was a hidden tax of $6.80 and we were being oppressive when they came into office, they had to reduce it, Mr. Speaker. Why did they increase it by an additional $1.50? And they said they moved to $4. So which means if you add $1.50 on $6.80, you can never get $4. So today, I want them, so he went to dive for it in that particular mechanism, and I'm hoping that he would make it available today. But the point is, Mr. Speaker, he has made things worse for the people of the country. When he imposed that $1.50 on each gallon of gas, the people of this country are paying much more, Mr. Speaker, for goods and services. Can you imagine in Castries, somebody who sells goods to Bouton, Soufrière, Laborie, Vieux-Fort, for every gallon of gas, there's an additional $1.50. They will pass on that cost to the consuming public. So we saw no reduction in the prices of goods and services in the economy, but we saw a general increase. A general increase. That in itself, Mr. Speaker, is bad news. I do not see any type of fiscal discipline being demonstrated by the current administration. What they have been doing from the time they got into office, Mr. Speaker, is to destroy everything good that they found. They found thousands of people employed, they got rid of them. And the only thing that they're utilizing the resources of the country to do is not for healthcare and for airport redevelopment. Only recently, the government sent out a press release, the Department of Infrastructure, Ports and Energy, indicating that they're building a new road to accommodate the Hiwanora International Airport reconstruction project. Mr. Speaker, this is completely untrue. This is completely untrue. The airport is south of the Laurentius Road. If there was development of that area, you did not need to close the Laurentius Road. In fact, what they are doing is opposed to the proper development of the Hiwanora International Airport. They're actually building on a road that was in an area that was supposed to have been reserved for the terminal to have been properly situated, Mr. Speaker, and for the necessary security clearances to be in place. But they have diverted the road, spent millions of dollars on a new road that was highly unnecessary, moving utilities, and coming here and behaving as if it's just normal borrowing to do something good. There was no need for that $12 million to build a road encroaching on airport property. The Laurentius Road just needed repaving. It's wide enough. You probably could enhance it with some drainage works. But there was nothing wrong, Mr. Speaker, to accommodate a racetrack, which, of course, will bring absolutely nothing in terms of future benefits to the people of this country. By the Prime Minister's own admission that the track would be a loss-making enterprise. And so we have spent millions of dollars just to subsidize the Prime Minister's reckless desires of having a racetrack. And everything is subordinated to the building of that racetrack. The Prime Minister found and he opened the door about health care. Mr. Speaker, we should be borrowing.
Remember, just a reminder of the motion.
We, of course, we are borrowing, Mr. Speaker. I am just saying that we could have avoided borrowing today if we did not waste all those monies on some racetrack. That's what I'm saying, Mr. Speaker. We could have avoided the borrowing. I'm hearing some $12 million to some Lockerbie individual for something that is like the emperor's new clothes. Had we, Mr. Speaker, avoided that cost, we would not come here to borrow any money for that purpose, however good they claim it is, Mr. Speaker. Those things that we are doing and we sometimes come here to borrow for are actually within the sphere of competence of our public servants, as the leader of the opposition said. So we engage in wasting the country's money, and then we come here and say, let's borrow for something good, and the opposition must agree because it is something good. But we must look at the borrowing in the overall context of what we are doing. When the government came in 2011, we had taken a loan from the Taiwanese for the reconstruction of the St. Joe's Hospital. We borrowed. The hospital was almost completed, Mr. Speaker. And then they found all sorts of things. They are masquerading all over the place, indicating that it is not appropriate. It was a hospital, you know. That was St. Joe's Hospital. And if it was not burnt in 2009, the hospital would have been operating. Now, it's improved. It's improved. They found money to build St. Jude's. But no, just for petty politics, they say they're going to build some cage at St. Jude's now because the hospital is not good. Mr. Speaker, I am from the southern part of the island. And you know every time I come to this house, the issue of healthcare and St. Jude's is of paramount importance. How can you deprive the people of the south of the hospital? We have a CT scan in one of the rooms that the people of the south could benefit from. But people have to go all the way to Tapia to pay over $1,000 for a scan. Persons who cannot afford to even have breakfast in a day. Just because this government believes that they have dominion over life and death. Just because they figure out they can do whatever they want. But I have made it clear in this house, Mr. Speaker, I have read the mood of the people of the South. If the Prime Minister believes that he's going to build some cage or some pig pen and put people in it, I am telling the Prime Minister, he better think again. Because the people of the southern part of the island are determined to resist occupation of their hospital by any other entity. By any other entity. So, Mr. Speaker, the other point is, when we are going to finance expenditure, we have what is called the overall account. So we have the overall balance, where included in the overall balance is grants from overseas. In the construction of the hospital, millions of dollars were given to us by friendly governments to pump into something that is of paramount importance for the economic development of this country. And the Prime Minister and his government decides to just throw over $40 million away and comes here and pretend that it's legitimate borrowing they are coming to do. We are in a very difficult environment where countries are not as generous as before, Mr. Speaker. And if we are going to jeopardize our chances of attracting official development assistance, then the borrowing will get worse. And when the borrowing gets worse, Mr. Speaker, what happens? Interest costs will grow rapidly and narrows room for fiscal maneuver. Key investments in the future are at risk. Rising debt means lower incomes, less flexibility to respond to crises. We are in a hurricane belt. Already we are struggling to meet our obligations. We have a fiscal deficit, and the government is widening that fiscal deficit like there's no tomorrow. It limits our ability to respond to a hurricane. If we have a major hurricane in this country, apart from doing our usual business, we have to respond to it. How do we respond when the government insists on borrowing for all the wrong reasons, Mr. Speaker? Protecting the essential safety net. We have the vulnerable in our midst, and I think the member for Grozile should be able to appreciate that. When you grow debt, it doesn't give you the room to take care of the most vulnerable in our society. A solid fiscal foundation leads to economic growth. Mr. Speaker, the situation is further compounded by the government moving away from the arrangement with the World Bank for the financing of the airport. Move away from it for no good reason. So over $400 million now, we will have to take in debt. We'll have to borrow. Before, with the over $400 million, the World Bank would have taken care of the airport redevelopment. They would have managed it for a certain amount of years. And we would have the space by not borrowing that 400 million to actually address ourselves to the pressing but legitimate needs of this country, like education. And I'm happy that the South Louis students are here. Like South Louis, we could now pump. Jamaica did it only recently. We could now invest in education. And other times, you know, we watch teachers and students, and we believe that we spend a lot of money on education, and education do not bring in any monies into government coffers. But if you want to know about economic chaos, it's close schools and send teachers home. Education, Mr. Speaker, it caused the workforce to be more efficient so that they can produce at a cheaper rate, so goods and services will be lower, and that would feed economic growth. Education has its own benefit, and it's very important, Mr. Speaker, that we understand those things when we decide to manage an economy. So what are we doing here today, Mr. Speaker? We are just growing debt and growing debt and growing debt in a manner that's not organized, in a manner that is not going to really invest in the productive sectors of the economy. That racetrack is a problem, a burden for the people of this country. And I will conclude, Mr. Speaker, by suggesting to the government that they attempt to pursue a better course of action where managing the fiscal problem of the country is concerned. Because we are going to find ourselves into a problem tomorrow. Because we have not even gotten to that 200 million US dollars that they're talking about. And already our debt to GDP ratio is already so high. So in fact, Mr. Speaker, in fact, Mr. Speaker, I do not fall easy prey to provocation. I will maintain a disciplined course. And I will conclude my presentation this morning by saying to you this afternoon, yes, of course it's empty because revelation comes to the prepared mind. Revelation comes to the prepared mind. And if the mind is prepared, they cannot receive that warning and that message. When you try to come here and try to heckle me, you do not know what you're doing, honorable member. I think you should supposed to learn. Just sit and learn.
Honorable members.
So, Mr. Speaker, that is what you get when, you know, persons who are not interested in representing people are here. Just creating noise and just messing around, masquerading here as if it's a playground. This place is not a playground. This is serious business. We are talking about the lives of people who are affected because St. Jude's Hospital is not completed. We are talking about our schools that are in a bad condition. We are talking about the legitimate and pressing needs of the people of this country that have been ignored by his government. And he's laughing. Continue to laugh. But the just God who presides over the destinies of nations will deal with you. No matter what you plan and plot, God has a way of undoing it. So, Mr. Speaker, I thank you for allowing me to make my brief intervention, and you shall be hearing from me if necessary as we navigate the agenda for the day. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.